At the end of the year, the media started running stories about a market downturn and falling prices. There never seems to be any middle ground with property headlines. It's it's always either boom or doom. What sparked these new gloomy headlines? Should we pay attention as we prepare for 2022? Welcome to The Elephant in the Room. This is the podcast where we love to talk about the big things in property that never usually get talked about. I'm Veronica Morgan, real estate agent, buyer's agent, co-host of Foxtel's Location Australia, and author of Auction Ready.
And I'm Chris Bates, mortgage broker. Before we get started, I need to let you know that nothing we say on here can be taken as personal advice. We always recommend you engage the services of a professional.
Don't forget that you can access the transcript for this episode on the website, as well as download our free full or forecaster report, Which Experts Can You Trust to Get It Right? theelephantintheroom.com.au. In November, Sydney auction clearance rates fell from 11 straight weeks above 80% into the 70th percentile. And I watched in disbelief as headlines turned to market crash predictions. Why disbelief? Well, because a clearance rate above 70% has traditionally been regarded as a marker of a hot market. And something similar was happening in Melbourne, yet Brisbane was defying all the odds and showed the strongest price growth of all the capital cities. And this prompted me to ask two very experienced buyers agents to join me and discuss the market in each city and what we can expect as we move into 2022. Meighan Wells of Brisbane's Property Pursuit and Jarrod McCabe of Melbourne's Wakelin Advisory won't be strangers to our long-term listeners, and welcome to you both.
Thank you for having us.
Hi, Veronica. Hi, Meighan. Good to see you both.
Yeah, good to see you too. My goodness, it's been a long time since we've been in the same place.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
In fact, I think that was 2019, wasn't it? The middle of which, yes. So, Jarrod, I'm going to kick off.
Actually, we're in Melbourne, weren't we, Veronica? We were
2.5 years ago.
with Jarrod down there. We're doing a bit of business, recording some videos.
True.
Yeah.
Memories. Jarrod, I'm going to kick off with you first. How has the Melbourne property market fared coming out of its sixth lockdown?
Your summary was pretty good before, Veronica. It seemed like you could have been talking about Melbourne or Sydney there. We came out of our lockdown, we probably had it a bit more severe in terms of impact on property specifically than what you did in Sydney, just in the fact that we couldn't conduct one-on-one inspections at all during August and the majority of September. And then once things started to come out, we were able to do the one-on-one inspections, and it's gradually progressed to being back to relative normality at the moment. The first probably 4 weeks after that first easing of restrictions to one-on-one inspections was manic. It went berserk. It went further than what it was doing the first half of the year, which was very, very strong. But the first 4 weeks was fairly crazy, and there was a lot of extreme prices being paid. There was a lot of fear of missing out. I think there'd been a lot of buyers that had missed out 3 or 4 times and were just adamant that they were going to buy the first thing that they came across. But after that 4-week period, it's really started to settle down a bit. But similar to what you just said, the clearance rate has come back, but that's not unusual at this time of year.
And that leads into something that's quite interesting. We'll get to Brisbane in a minute, but certainly in Sydney, and I suspect Melbourne is quite similar. There's a seasonality to what's happening at the moment. I'm feeling it here. Would you say that a lot of what's happening, or when I say what's happening, the tense is going to go all over the shop here because we're recording this in December. However, we'll be releasing this in January. So we're sort of saying that at the end of the year as if it's happened, but we're experiencing as we speak. So what typically happens in Sydney is spring brings a lot of new stock onto the market, and buyers are quite often, particularly in a hot market, they're exhausted. And so they are like going, oh my God, actually, it's great to see the pressure eased. And instead of taking advantage of that, quite often what they do is say, you know what, I'm just going to go and do other things and I'll wait till next year before I buy. And that is a typical spring into Christmas market in Sydney. Would you say you're seeing similar things in Melbourne?
Yeah, exactly. So we've missed out on a month and a half basically of transactions in August and September. So there was a lot of vendors, who were ready to go at that stage and were planning to sell in the early part of the spring market and didn't get the opportunity to because they weren't prepared to sell in a market where buyers couldn't inspect their properties. So they held back, and that's what's increased the supply above what it would normally be at this time of year. But you do see this on a very regular basis, that the supply builds and builds, people buy and then need to sell. So there's a lot of property coming on the market. But it also gets to, we find that after Melbourne Cup, sort of mid-November towards late November, that those that have missed out start to lose. You can find that it either goes one of two ways. If it's a really strong market that's probably starting, so like 2019, where we really built through the spring market right up to Christmas, and it continued a really strong clearance rate right through to the last Saturday prior to Christmas Day, and it was a really strong build. Whereas other years, you'll find that once you get that other side of the Melbourne Cup long weekend, it really starts to plateau and then starts to drop off, and buyers lose focus. They're focusing on Christmas, family, going on holidays, and decide that we'll look at buying property again in the new year, take stock, talk to family and friends, and reconsider our options. And that's probably been exacerbated even further this year, given that a lot of Victorians, Melburnians particularly, haven't been able to get out at all. And so they're looking to really make the most of this summer period. And so property's becoming a second option and will be reviewed again in the new year.
We've had an enormous amount of auctions in Sydney, and I know you've had huge volumes in Melbourne as well. How are the clearance rates in Melbourne as you head into the end of the year?
Again, as you said, we're pretty similar to Sydney, I think. I mean, we've, prior to this year, probably the biggest weekend in Victoria was about 1,800 or 1,900 auctions. And it was usually on that last Saturday of October, usually the really big one, because it's a clear run from the AFL Grand Final before the Spring Carnival kicks in. Sport's very important.
Very important time frames here that are very sport oriented. Does the ballet come into this?
It doesn't seem to impact the auction market.
Then tennis is in January when nothing's happened anyway.
When nothing's happening. So that's done deliberately too. So no, but you get a clear run there. And so that's quite often the last Saturday or last weekend in October is quite often the biggest weekend of the year. But this year we've seen auction numbers the last 2 weeks, and I think the next 2 weeks as well, maybe not the 18th. So I think it was at least 3 to 4 weeks where there's been in excess of 2,000 auctions every weekend, which is, and then to see that the clearance rate initially did hold up at around 80%. It's now dropped back into the 70s. And I think on the weekend, it dropped below 70% into the high 60s. So, but I don't know if you could expect anything else when you get that flood of supply. It's just, and when you're moving into a Christmas period where people do tend to change focus, it's absolutely to be expected.
Yeah. Meighan, Brisbane isn't what you call an auction city, like Sydney and Melbourne are. But if you can't use clearance rates as a gauge of what the market's doing, how do you typically measure the heat or otherwise in the market?
It's really interesting because traditionally Brisbane's had about 10% or less of properties that go to auction sold through private treaty, and the clearance rates generally sit between about 53 and 56%. So that's, I'm extrapolating over a long period of time, but at the moment we're sitting at about 73%, and that's extraordinarily high for Brisbane. Now that's come off a little bit from being in the 80s, and one of the really interesting things is that we've got a whole lot of things all happening at the same time. We've got seasonality, which Jarrod really clarified in Melbourne what happens with seasonality down there. Here, seasonality really only came into its own in the last 4 or 5 years with a spring selling season, which was largely driven by the media telling everybody up here that there is spring. We don't even know there's spring up here. We go from winter to summer, and it's about a 2-week transition. But, now we have a spring selling season. So we have a seasonality factor, which is a bit more property coming on in spring. We have a market cycle happening, which is there is a lot of buyer demand, and that buyer demand isn't petering off just yet, although we're starting to see green shoots of that. So we've had a lot of buyer demand, which means we're in a really strong upward cycle like most of the country. And that's really interesting because what that's doing is actually forcing agents to make a decision as to whether they're going to go down the traditional private treaty route, which is, to put people in competition, present offers to owners and essentially say to them, put your best and final offer forward. And often those offers have conditions. now agents are saying to owners, look, we can run a really short campaign here, maybe a 2-week or a 10-day auction campaign, and put these people in competition with each other. So the traditional auction campaign of 4 or 5 weeks, 4 weeks of open houses and auction on the 5th week, is being shortened in Brisbane. And we have this new kind of phenomenon of properties being put to a short auction campaign, which is kind of good because it opens up the transparency of the negotiation with the buyers. But it's hard because if you haven't got all your ducks lined up, and, you know, as Veronica, you know, disclosure is very limited in Queensland. So it's a very short period of time to get everything done. So we've got, you know, as I say, seasonality is happening. We've got market cycle that's happening. We've got holidays coming up, and most people leave Brisbane during the holidays because they want to drive that 1 hour to get to the coastal areas. And so there's an exodus of people from Brisbane during the holiday period. So the private schools have already gone on holidays. We're 7th of December when we're recording this, and they won't go back to school until the last week of January. So there's a large period of time where Brisbaneites aren't here. But now we've got the X factor, which is the COVID factor, which we have, the borders have just been announced to be reopened largely to most people from the 14th, the morning of 1 a.m. on Monday, the 13th of December. So people who were originally preparing to come here on the 17th of December and now maybe getting into the state a little bit earlier. So this X factor of people, this pressure of people who are coming into the state is actually going to change the seasonality and the cycle. So we've got this X factor effect on 2 things, well, 3 things really, that we normally see during this part of the year, which is seasonality, holidays, and then market cycle. So it's really an unusual time in the Brisbane property market.
Well, I think clearance rates in the 80s and 70s even is unusual.
Completely. Yep.
But also, so you're suggesting that a lot of these people that are coming up to visit family or have holidays or whatever, that they're actually coming up with an intention to buy?
There's a massive relocation trend coming into Queensland at the moment, and we've seen that in the data, but we're going to see it more now that the borders are open. We've got people who are coming back to Queensland who are, you know, Brisbane or Queensland-based people who have lived interstate and are going to move back here. We've seen a large response from investors to the marketplace saying, I can get a really good price for my property at the moment, therefore I'm going to divest. They're selling really well and making good money, which was maybe part of their plan, maybe it brought their plan forward. But there's a decrease in the number of investment properties available for rent at the moment, which is putting upward pressure on rental prices. And then we've got the influx of international people and interstate people who are looking to relocate to Brisbane. So the net migration into Queensland, and particularly southeast Queensland, is the strongest that it's been since 2002, which is when we saw our last rather amazing boom in prices. And I don't use the word lightly. I don't like the word boom, but there's no other way to describe what prices are doing at the moment, other than every now and then we look at each other in our office and say, it's sold for what? with shock and awe of what prices are doing and how quickly things are moving.
What's so interesting is that particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, we've had an exodus of people leaving both cities to the regions and also north to Brisbane, Vegas. And yet our prices have been rising. And I know Melbourne hasn't been quite as strong as Sydney, and I'm talking generally about Sydney market. I know you've got to be careful here because there's micro markets within markets, etc. However, when you see Sydney prices have gone up roughly about 30% over a year, and people have been leaving, Melbourne hasn't got quite that much. What's the Melbourne median price done in the last year, Jarrod? Not to be
close to 20%, I'd say, maybe a bit more.
Which is still decent, right? Let's face it. We're not,
still very strong. Yeah,
we're not going to quibble over that. No. And then you look at Brisbane, and where the population is moving towards. Certainly, Australians are certainly moving there, and that's and we'll be seeing prices rise. So the sustainability of that boom, as you call it, advised terms, Meighan?
Well, do you know, I call it upward pressure. Honestly, that's the term that I generally use. There's an extraordinary amount of upward pressure on prices at the moment because the demand is not flagging and the supply is quite good. We have more transactions than we have ever had since 1996. I think I did some data on that. So the transactions are there, but the demand is far outweighing the supply from that point of view. So it's not like there's not enough listings. There's just way too many people looking for those properties.
But it's not local demand. You've got migration from other states there. And I'm curious, though, just sort of before we move into, I guess, what to expect for next year in all three areas, but I'm curious, back in 2002, you said that last boom. How long would you say that lasted for?
It went through to about the end of 2003 to start of 2004. So there was a sustained period of quite strong growth over that period of time. And it was a period of time where actually at the time that it started, I was a selling agent. So I was riding that, wow, I can't believe they just got that price sort of thing. And then at the end of, sort of towards the end of it, I went into buyer's agency, which is, where you're trying to work hard to get a really decent price for, buy at a really decent price for people. And it was a period of time where we had that high net migration at the same time, but we actually didn't have an X factor apart from, and this is largely in the past what's driven price growth in Brisbane. It was the biggest price differential between Sydney and Melbourne at the time than we'd seen in a really long time. And Brisbane had just come out of quite a stagnant period of almost, I think there was negative growth through the 90s, and it was very difficult to sell properties. And it could take 18 months to sell properties in the 90s in Brisbane. So it sort of came off a really, really, really low base. And then this large a factor of net migration and the affordability gap. But there was a lot of investor activity at that point in time. So in that sort of early 2000s period, there was a huge amount of interstate investment that was happening in Brisbane, not just migration and a principal place of residence purchases happening. We're not seeing that now. And I think the thing that I guess I want to table with the group today is I think there's going to be a huge amount of pressure on people who are renting properties. There has been a massive, I was talking to the CEO of one of the biggest franchises in Australia, the Queensland CEO of one of the biggest franchises in Australia the other day. And I said to him, we've lost about 23% of our rent roll, which is a small rent roll. We're a small business, Property Pursuit. And he said, yeah, we're coming up to 25% of our rent roll has been sold in Queensland. So that's investors taking advantage of the market and selling their properties. We are not seeing investors in the marketplace in Brisbane and Greater Queensland at the moment replacing that stock for renters of properties. And I think that's the biggest concern that I have for the market in Queensland. And Jarrod, I'd be interested in, Veronica, yourself and what you're seeing investors doing, because we're normally about a 50-50 split in buyer's agency of owner-occupiers and investors. And we're probably sitting at about 20% investors at the moment. So we're not replenishing the stock that's being sold out of the market at the moment.
What are you seeing?
We're seeing, we're probably normally a bit different. We're normally probably 80-20 investors because that's where we pitched ourselves. So that's what we do. Yeah. But that's definitely dropped back. We're more probably getting closer to being 50-50, maybe 60-40 investors. But that's a substantial change. That's happened over a period of time. And that's not just COVID related. Since the Royal Commission, I think that's had an impact on investors, and there just hasn't been as many of them in the marketplace. I'm interested, Meighan, in terms of the rental demand up around Queensland, because we've certainly seen in the regional areas of Victoria that those that have been looking to do the tree change, a lot of them have taken up rental properties. So the rental values in a lot of regional cities around Melbourne, whether it's Ballarat, Bendigo, Geelong, or perhaps down on one of the peninsulas, has been extremely strong.
Yes, certainly seeing it up here as well, both regionally and in the city. And just from a personal point of view within our business, we've got properties that we might have had been getting maybe $650 a week. We advertise them for $680 a week. A lot of break leases at the moment, so people purchasing properties, breaking lease, or attempting to end their tenancy early, and so we're replacing those tenants with other tenants. So a particular example was I think it was $650 a week. And we had so many applications that someone offered $720 a week. Now, in Queensland, it's illegal to advertise the property and say, offer what you want, go for it, bid, auction, whatever. That's not possible up here. These are actually people who are saying, I have missed out on so many properties. I'm going to throw everything I've got just to get somewhere to put my family into. So they're actually putting themselves out in a position of offering more than what's being asked in terms of rent in order to actually secure a property. So that there is actually a level of almost, I wouldn't call it desperation yet, but there is a high level of motivation for people to secure housing in all price ranges. Now, can I differentiate between houses, freehold houses, and townhouses versus units? So, your investor stock style units are still oversupplied in Brisbane. But the townhouses and the freehold houses and 3-bedroom units, those bigger sort of family style units, they're the ones that are seeing a lot of upward pressure on rental prices at the moment. A lot of demand.
Anecdotally, I'm hearing in New South Wales as well that and a lot of people have been interviewed on the podcast as well, really talking about that pressure in regional areas, because it's not just that investors are sold out and then an owner-occupier bought it, but what we're finding and what we're hearing a lot is that investors sold out and somebody's bought it as a second home and then using it for Airbnb. And so the actual hasn't been bought by another investor or necessarily an owner-occupier either. And in terms of the statistics, those people come up as investors. But the impact, obviously, on the rental stock and the vacancy rate in a lot of those regional towns is quite devastating if you get that en masse, and that's certainly what I've been hearing quite a bit about as well. Have you been hearing that sort of thing, Jarrod?
I've heard a lot of, particularly early days with COVID, there was a lot of people going to regional areas and just deciding that just to get out of Melbourne, they would look at signing a 12-month lease just so that they would still retain their home in a lot of instances in Melbourne and just keep it sitting there vacant, and then be able to move to a regional area where they've perhaps got a bit more flexibility. And because of the working from home move, a lot of people have been able to do that. It gives them greater flexibility to determine whether or not it's a permanent move or whether or not once some restrictions are eased a bit, as we're seeing now, whether they'll then make the move back to the city.
Yeah, and it's funny because, back when I was filming the show, I'd always say to people, if you're going to move, out of an urban area into a regional area, then go and rent. But the option, I think, maybe in the early days of lockdown, the option was still there, but I think that option is really very difficult now. And it's interesting you talk about the seasonality, just sort of back to what else has been happening in the marketplace is the seasonality. I worked out, I think it's really been 5 years since we had a normal spring market in Sydney. And there's good reasons for each year. So we've got 2021. Well, it's not, I think this is a normal spring market in Sydney, by the way, where you just get more stock, buyers get tired and over it, and they just it's much more fun to go to the beach, go Christmas shopping.
They really are.
Yeah, they're done. So this, I think, is more typical. But 2020, obviously, we all know that wasn't typical in any man's or woman's language. 2019 was coming off the back of the market starting to rebuild after the election, a couple of years of downturn, which, Jarrod, you mentioned earlier. 2018 was in the doldrums. Nothing was happening. 2017 was like the first 6 months of a downturn, so that wasn't happening. 2016 went gangbusters right up to Christmas. And interestingly enough, the last time it did that was 2007. So you can say, right, 2007, just before that crash of the GFC, went gangbusters right up till Christmas, and 2016, right before the crash, if you want to call it that, or the downturn caused by APRA and the Royal Commission and the squeeze on lending, and that went gangbusters. So it's sort of interesting to think that if market behaves counterintuitively, i.e. you get a hot market in spring, instead of a slowing down, then usually that's could be a warning sign that the next year is actually, it's going to finally overheat, So that's sort of a theory there. But however, this year, I guess what I want to talk to you guys as to what we could expect moving into 2022, because if that's typical of a spring market in Sydney, where we get loads of stock, buyers start getting bored, the clearance rates start falling, we get to the end of the year, we limp to the end of the year where we just there might be a few listings left over, by Christmas, and then nothing happens for a couple of weeks because everything shuts. And we're an auction area, so therefore, or an auction city, so therefore any area that's predominantly auctions, you're not going to see a lot of new listings coming on until they can run a full auction campaign. And then you've got Australia Day that sort of gets in the way of that at the end of January. So you're really not going to see much in the way of stock come on till very end of January into February, which is one of the reasons why clearance rates typically have been highest in February, because that's when there's the lowest amount of stock. And then you've got all these buyers that have re-entered the market or entered the market because they've had time to think and a holiday and maybe get divorced over, maybe lose it, maybe split up. All the life changes that happens when you have a bit of time to have a breather and a couple of cold bevies. And, and so that's a sort of a typical entry into a Sydney property market in what we call a normal market. Is that the sort of thing that you would anticipate in Melbourne, Jarrod?
If you like what you're hearing here, please share this episode with others you feel would benefit. And while you're at it, why not leave us an iTunes review? 5 stars, please. Every review helps make it easier for other people to find us and hear what our amazing guests have to say. We love hearing your questions, and we're planning more listener Q&A episodes. Please send your questions in. You can send them via the website, which is theelephantintheroom.com.au, or directly via email to questions@theelephantintheroom.com.au.
Yeah, and where again you're speaking Melbourne's language there, Veronica. It's the same sort of thing. We tend to find that Australia Day is quite often the trigger for things to start off again. It's probably started a little bit earlier the last couple of years, but usually the bulk of the market starts to open up. People are coming back from holidays. The year really starts in February with school, that type of thing as well. And you do get that clear run. So we have Labor Day, which next year is the second weekend of March. So you typically find that if you start just after Australia Day, there'll be 3 weekends before Labor Day. There'll be the 19th of Feb, 26th of Feb, and then the 5th of March will be the 3 main weekends. And then we'll have Labor Day, and then there'll be a bit of an interruption then, and we'll get another clear run because Easter's, I think, about the second weekend of April next year. So there's usually a reasonably clear run for a few weeks there as well. But then you get Anzac Day, and Anzac Day next year creates a long weekend because it's a Monday. So there's the first 4 months of the year, there's a lot of interruptions. And it's interesting, I mean, it's probably getting off topic a little bit, but if you sit back and look at the whole calendar year, there's quite often not much more than a 6 to 8 week period where you don't get an interruption from something, whether it's a public holiday, whether it's school holidays. There's always something that starts to throw the market or just makes the market stall for a week or two and then kick again. So it'll be interesting to see how it opens up next year. But we do a bit of vendor advisory work, and that's probably making up a fair bit more of our business in recent years as well. And we quite regularly advise clients that selling in February, March is a great time because of that pent-up demand that you spoke about. And people do go away and think about things and talk to friends and family over the break and really make some significant decisions. And you combine that with the fact that there's been any number of buyers who've missed out prior to Christmas and just got sick of the market and decided to take stock. And you combine all that, it's not unusual to see a strong market open in the new year. And the other thing that we probably take notice of is how do the peninsulas perform during January? So the Mornington Peninsula and the Bellarine Peninsula, so Portsea, Sorrento, Blairgowrie, Rye, and then over the other side at Barwon Heads and Queenscliff, Point Lonsdale, Lorne and Torquay, and see what the market's doing there. You regularly see if the market is strong on those peninsulas over the break. It typically means that Melbourne will open quite well. Not always in reverse, though. You don't always, just because it's poor or not strong down on the peninsulas, doesn't mean that it won't be strong in Melbourne. It could still be. But if it is positive, it's quite often pretty strong in Melbourne too.
Would
so
the
your
same
holiday market, it's a little bit like
That's
the
right.
Sunshine Coast and the Gold
that's
Coast
exactly
of
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you're going to say the same thing in what about Gold Coast? The sunny coast, yes. The Gold Coast, is that same thing, or is it a beast of its own?
The demand there is so strong at the moment that the prices are racing fairly steadily upwards, and it's very hard. Do you know what I found really fascinating? Sorry, Jarrod, was listening to you talk about the year in auction chunks.
Yeah.
Obviously that's how a selling agent and, a buyer's agent in those markets who knows those markets really well has to think. We don't have to really think like that up here necessarily, except it is becoming more and more prevalent. So thank you. You just gave me an awesome piece of gold today to think about.
And we look at that
as we change to an auction market in Brisbane.
Yeah, it's amazing. You look at it and you look at the public holidays and when they sit, there's Australia Day, there's Labor Day, there's Easter, there's Queen's birthday. There's usually a gap in the middle of the year, but not a lot happens winter-wise in Melbourne because of the cold weather. So it does go dormant during sort of July, August, and then things open up and you'll have a chuckle again, but the grand final's a big thing at the end of September. So, and that's now a long weekend.
And then you've got Melbourne Cup
put there, and then you've got Melbourne Cup, and then you've got Christmas. So it really is amazing that there are, if you look at it, it's probably 6 to 8 weeks is the best clear run that you'll get.
Look at that. Okay, so there's a piece of gold from Jarrod McCabe from Wakelin Property Advisory Melbourne for sellers listening to this podcast about how to plan your auction campaign when to go to market. But in the meantime, here we are talking about what's happening next year. Veronica, the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast have got extraordinarily strong demand. They are the more volatile markets in Brisbane. So if you think about, and I always use the terminology, Brisbane's usually like the Clydesdale. It's pretty reliable. It plods along. When things slow, they don't necessarily drop. Whereas the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast markets are heavily influenced by large disposable incomes, low interest rates, popularity during times where people want to have a lifestyle aspect and bring that into their portfolio. Whether that's a relocation or a second home or whatever the case may be, that's what we're experiencing in those markets at the moment. And they are racing fairly strongly in terms of price growth at the moment and demand, both from an interstate migration point of view and also from a second home point of view. Now, I'm really interested because, Veronica, you mentioned about, we talked about the pressure on rental prices and the decrease in the amount of properties in the rental pool. But you also talked about Airbnb and, those short-term rental options. I think there are a number of properties probably on the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast that had been in those short-term holiday rental pools that went into the long-term rental pools during periods of time where people couldn't travel. And we may actually see those, I feel fairly confident that we will see those come out of those long-term rental pools and back into the short-term accommodation again. So that's going to potentially take a large other number of properties out of the long-term rental pools in those markets. And I know in the coastal markets, north coast of New South Wales, excuse me, I stumbled over that one. North coast of New South Wales, which whilst it's over your border is probably a little closer to me, in terms of that's where where I grew up, and I know that market pretty well. It is extraordinarily difficult to get a rental property around, Ballina, Byron Bay, Lennox Head, those coastal markets on the north coast of New South Wales. It is very, very, very difficult to get a long-term rental there at the moment.
So what typically happens in the new year in Brisbane, in the Brisbane market? Because you're not here. Well, you don't have those sort of auction, you don't have those auction cycles that Jarrod and I are familiar with. And but you said that most what do you call these calls?
From Brisbane-ites. Yep.
Brisbane-ites. Yeah. So you said that most Brisbanians will evacuate the city because it's bloody hot and there's no coast.
Yeah, they tend to go to the coast. So you'll find half of Brisbane and Noosa and the other half on the Gold Coast. I jest, but there is a large, there is that people go outside of Brisbane generally for the school holiday period, whether they stay through until Christmas and then they go or whatever. But the roads are really quiet. It's quite quiet in the city, and you'll find most people on the coast. So that's great. This year with tourism, we're really encouraging tourism within Queensland and people staying around. That's fabulous. But what it means for the property market is it is a time where, well, there's two things happening. One, it's quieter, so there aren't many new listings, but most agents know what properties are going to come on in January, and they're aiming those properties to come on the market late January. So around that, post Australia Day, when people are back at school, maybe the week before they'll come on the market. Most agents know about that. So it actually creates good buying opportunities during this period of time where people have gone, I'm tired, I'm done, I'm out of here. I can't think about it anymore. I need to plan my Christmas lunch. I need to actually have some time with my family. I just can't think about buying a property anymore. They're exhausted. There are buyers who are absolutely exhausted. They've made 3, 4, 6, 8 offers on properties, been to 4 or 5 auctions. They're exhausted at the moment and they just want some downtime. But there are properties there. The agents know about them, and most of them are working through to a large degree. You could pick up the phone to them and say, what have you got coming up? And you'll find out about them. So there are opportunities out there during this period, but there's a lot less pressure on the immediacy of getting in, making an offer and buying.
So it sounds like that's a commonality across all 3 markets, that we can expect less stock. We can expect fresh buy in the short term. Can you hear that? There's a big thunderstorm here in Sydney. It's going off.
Thunder. Wow.
Yeah, thunder in the middle of the afternoon. Yeah.
I tell you what, your London background is looking beautiful and sunny, though.
I know. It's a beautiful London background I've got. I just thought I'm trying to channel. One day we'll be back out there again.
Back there traveling.
So we basically, the commonality is that what we've got is low stock throughout January. You've got potential for new buyers to come into each market, really, but potentially more local buyers entering the market in Sydney and Melbourne than in Brisbane. Brisbane, you got some of our evacuees as well. And so
evacuees, but honestly, Veronica, at the moment, about 60% of our buyers within the business are upgraders, local upgraders.
Right. Okay. So it's
really strong demand locally as well.
That local pressure. So we've got local pressure then from all areas, but also because my involvement with investors certainly has dropped off over the last few years as well. And despite the fact that investor lending has upticked, we're not yet seeing a huge amount. We have got a few more investor clients on in the last, month of the year, but we haven't seen a huge uptick, certainly not that noticeable. And of course, if investors do enter the market in any force, that's going to actually have quite a shift. If we've had a tough time trying to buy in these conditions and a lot of investors come in, that's going to up the ante a little bit. But, so despite all these headlines, when Commonwealth Bank coming out sort of saying there's going to be a 13% price fall in 2022, all that sort of palaver, what are you sensing on the ground? I mean, let's start with you, Jarrod. What are you sensing as we move into 2022? What is your feel? Because we all get a sense, don't we? I mean, we're dealing with this day in, day out, so you do get a sense of what's happening. How have you sensed the sort of slowdown, if you like, at the end of the year? And do you feel that's going to continue into 2022, or do you think strap yourselves in, kids? We're still on the roller coaster.
I think I think we're finding a level in Melbourne now. I think it's starting to find its position. I don't think we'll see clearance rates keep dropping. I wouldn't be surprised to see them sort of hover around high 60s, early 70s, that sort of level. I don't necessarily expect it to get back up to 80% or so, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it get back into the 70s for a period of time, potentially up to, say, Easter, and then start to recalibrate and get itself back around that sort of level. So I think there'll still be good competition around, particularly for the good quality properties and during the first quarter of the year. But I'm not expecting to see what we saw last year, where it was going from strength to strength week after week. I think we'll still get some growth next year, but I don't think it'll be what this year's been.
Meighan?
Oh, it's really interesting. So I think the thing that we keep an eye on, obviously, is buyer inquiry, because that's one of the drivers. And then you have to look at supply, what's coming on, that, they're the basics. But we have got a lot of people who are saying, I'm just going to sit on it until next year. So I think there is a little bit of pent up demand that is going to hit next year. But when, in our inner city areas, and we're talking about, and Jarrod, good point you made, it's quality properties. We're not talking about B and C grade locations, main roads, flood affected, on train lines. We're not talking about those properties necessarily, I guess, when we talk about, a general demand and increase. But the thing that I find really interesting about Brisbane is that it doesn't seem, there are no indications that I've seen in other market cycles of the slowing of buyer interest across all sectors apart from investors. So the investors are the only sector that I'm seeing a slowing in. So we're seeing that strong demand still coming from owner-occupiers, first-time buyers, from upgraders locally, from interstate, and from expats repatriating. So we've got really strong pressure coming from all of those markets. But when we talk about, that Brisbane area as opposed to the greater Brisbane area, there isn't a huge amount of increase in supply that can happen there. So there are only a small number of maybe splitter block subdivisions that could increase, a few properties within some of these inner city areas. So a bit like Sydney, where there's that pressure on the scarcity of the land, you can't, unless you keep going further out and further out and further out, and we're talking greater Brisbane, then not Brisbane City, there's just nowhere for people to go except to pay more money. And that's the really interesting thing that people are looking at, is if I want to be in these areas, I can't do anything except pay more money for the property and the area that I want to be in. And that's the compromise that people are talking about. Veronica, we talk about in your first home buyer guide, we talk about the compromises across three key areas, which is position, property, and price. And what people are compromising on most at the moment is price, and they're paying more than they expected to pay in order to get what they expected before, or making some compromises but still paying more money because they want to be in the areas and in the properties in the A-grade locations, particularly school catchments. So school catchments is a really big driver in Brisbane for public schools at the primary level, and then they can go on to any public schools at the primary level, and then private schools at the high school level. So I'm not seeing any change in that behaviour so far, or any change in the level of inquiry. I'm just seeing a bit of exhaustion at the moment, and I think that we're going to see that again reinvigorate through January and into 2022. How far? I don't crystal ball, never have, will not put a prediction out there, but I know buyer behaviour, and that's the buyer behaviour I'm seeing at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm observing similar things, to be honest, and it's normal when the market does slow a little bit, when choice comes into the marketplace, that buyers then can get picky again. Because let's face it, they lose all their pickiness when there's no choice, and when there's prices are rising and they feel that intense FOMO. But then as soon as they think, I've got a choice now, I don't have to buy on a main road anymore, they won't buy on that main road. So I think that, to me, is just normal behaviour. So I think in order to prepare, I just sort of put down a couple of notes here, which I'll sort of put them out there and you guys can add to it. But one of the things that a lot of people will ask me, it's like, well, when's the right time to buy? You're trying to time the market because I want to buy on the down and sell on the up. And I think we all three of us know that is a bit of folly, because I think we're all on the same page when we say, look, really the right time is when you're ready and when you found the right property. So because plenty of people are ready and they buy the wrong property, or plenty of people are ready and don't buy because they're waiting for the market to turn around, and they're not in control of the market. So I think the right time to buy, and it sounds, of course, self-interested. The buyer's agent says, the right time to buy is when you're ready. Of course. However, and I know that Jarrod in particular, you do a lot of work with Stuart Weems, and he's got a lot of evidence around this because he's a very evidence-based financial planner. You know, that you buy the right asset. It doesn't sort of matter the time when you buy it. It's buying for the long term. Any other hints for people preparing for 2022, Jarrod, Meighan?
We focus, as you guys do as well, asset selection is absolute key. So there's no point in going on and focusing too much on buying at the right time, because if you buy the wrong property at the right time, it's still going to be the wrong property when you come to sell it. So get your asset selection right first and foremost. Doesn't matter whether it's for an investment or whether it's for your home. It needs to meet the requirements, and then worry about buying at the best price you possibly can. So preparation is always key. And I think if you're going to hit the ground running in the new year, and whether it's to catch your breath and start again, or whether it's starting for the first time, just make sure you've got everything ready to go, so that if the right property comes up, whether it's private sale, whether it's an auction, you're in a strong position to engage as soon as it hits the market.
Well, I had a couple of notes here, Jarrod. I think you just said everything that was in my notes. Literally, the next thing was hit the ground running, and the next one was to how to get ready. So, being ahead of the game.
Add to that. Sorry, yeah. Can I add to that? Because I think, there's two key questions that we read in investor forums and first home buyer forums and so forth, and we get asked a lot, and that is where to buy, and which is not an answer that anyone should give you apart from working through the process itself. But the other thing is the advice that I see given, which is, it doesn't matter what you buy, just get into the market.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that it's a really important one that we want to dispel, because it does matter. It does matter. It's not about, when we talk about the best time to buy is when you're financially able, ready, and you understand what you're buying and why you're buying it. Once you've got those sort of key things in place, and you understand financially your position and your serviceability and all those sorts of really important preparation things, it isn't just about buying anything. And Jarrod, you hit the nail on the head by saying it is about the right asset selection, because if you get it wrong in a rapidly rising market or a peaking market, then it's going to hurt an awful lot for a very long time until you get another rapidly rising market or peaking market. And that's where you have to time your exit, because you have nothing but the market that will help you overcome poor asset selection. And that's such a key, I think, that we bang on and bang on and bang on and bang on about getting the property right. It's not about when you buy it, it's actually about buying the right thing.
Primary example of that, Meighan, we've just helped a client who bought a property themselves 10 years ago, off the plan apartment, bought it for, I think it was about $550,000, and we've just helped them sell it and sold it for $425,000.
In a peaking market, in a rising market.
10 years they've held that for.
Yeah.
So if someone says to you, it doesn't matter what you buy, just get in, there's an example of it does matter.
Excellent example.
Yeah, I think we need to write a book about that, but nobody will read it because they go, oh, you're just too negative. So I think hitting the ground running is
hurts.
It does. Hitting the ground running, I think, is really important. So then you are able to take advantage of the right opportunity when you come across it. And being clear on what it is that is a good asset and what you need is really important, so that you don't try to jump at anything. And I think that's it's a real danger, because when you're ready as well, you feel like you got money burning a hole in your pocket. And also, if you haven't learned what's the difference between an A, B, and C grade property, we've got your first home buyer guide episode on that. Just have to go over to that podcast and look it up, because I can't remember the number off the top of my head. But how to get ready, I've got 3 things here, and you guys can add to them. The first one is set a proper limit, as in your purchasing limit, your purchasing budget, not what you think you should pay or hope you should have to pay, but what you A, can afford, and B, what you need to pay to get what you want in whatever area you're looking in. Because a lot of people do, particularly when they're starting off their property search, they'll actually set their limit at what they think they should have to pay. And however long it takes them to come to grips with what's really in the market and what really they need is basically lost opportunity, particularly if it's a rising market. So educate yourself as to what the possibilities are of your search. And what you actually need to pay, and then work out what you can afford. Don't go in there just going with what you want to pay. The number 2 is be pre-approved. Or have a really clear understanding of exactly what your borrowing power is, because people...
And can I clarify? Pre-approval is not doing a calculator online. There was an example of a property in Queensland where a doctor had jumped online, done, I can afford that. Yep, that's fine. Made an unconditional offer, could not settle on the property because there was a whole lot of stuff in an online calculator that they don't ask you, and you don't have to put in there that the bank really, really, really wants to know. So it's not, pre-approval is not an online calculator. It's formal with the bank or a broker.
Did that happen in Brisbane? Because I read a doctor in Melbourne did the same thing.
Was it Melbourne, was it?
Oh, okay. So it's same exercise. Yeah. Lost $320,000 worth of deposit. Anyway. I'm like, God, you should be educated enough to anyway. But so if doctors can do it, anyone can make a mistake. Yeah. And the third thing is where to buy. Save time by looking in the right location. Meighan, you and I put together 2 workshops, one for investors and one for owner-occupiers, on where to buy, because everyone asks the question and you'll get 100 different answers from 100 different people, and nearly all of them are wrong. So
they're from other people's perspective. And I think that's the thing that, we want to point out is when someone answers the question where to buy, they're giving you the answer from their perspective, not from yours. So you have to understand your own perspective and your own goals and your own what you're trying to achieve, to work through a process to work out where to buy.
Absolutely. So, but people do spend a lot of time looking in the wrong location and really wasting time. We say ping pong all over the place, trying to chase the market. So being ready really means being prepared in those areas. Anything you'd like to add, Jarrod?
I was just going to say, you mentioned before, obviously, to hit the ground running and making sure that you're ready to go. You don't want to jump in too quickly, but I'm sure both of you have had the same experience whereby you've presented a really good option to a client, whether it's an investment or a home, and it's been very early in the search process and the response has been, I don't want to buy it. It's the first one I've seen. I'll wait and see. And how often then it then comes back to that everything gets compared back to that property. So if you've got yourself organised, you're ready to go, and the right property is the first property, don't be afraid to purchase it.
Yeah. And back to that, what you said earlier about being prepared. If you're prepared and you've done sort of all put in the hard yards, doing your research, getting everything lined up beforehand, you're going to be in a better position to recognise that. So thank you so much for joining us, both of you. This has been a great sort of overview of the year that was, or the end of the year that was, looking ahead into 2022, try to give you some understanding of the bigger picture of what these markets, how they perform, and the dynamics underneath, and what's important in different markets, and then to be ready to go if you want to buy in 2022, what you need to do to be prepared. So thanks, guys.
If you're looking to buy your dream home or an investment property in Sydney's inner west, eastern suburbs or North Shore, my team and I can help you buy without regrets. Reach out via my website, gooddeeds.com.au.
If you're looking to buy your first home, thinking of upgrading into a new one, or purchasing an investment property anywhere in Australia, my team love to carefully guide you on this journey. And most importantly, get the finance right. Reach out via our website, wealthful.com.au.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love to see you again.
And remember, don't be a Dumbo.